With Donald Trump's arrival in the White House, U.S. foreign policy has undergone significant changes. It has become more aggressive and unpredictable. It seemed that Trump's main priority would be confrontation with China, but instead he immediately entered into conflicts with his closest allies, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. In particular, Trump constantly blames Europe for its weakness and even threatens to abandon its defense in the event of external aggression. In this issue, we will analyze why Trump is in conflict with Europe and what he wants. The first point of conflict is defense spending. Even during his first term in office, Trump actively criticized European countries for insufficient defense spending. While the United States spends about 3.5% of GDP on defense, most European countries do not even reach 2%, and some have even lower figures. Trump has repeatedly emphasized that all NATO members must fulfill their obligations and spend at least 2% of GDP on defense. Today, many European countries have already reached this level, but Trump is again demanding that it be raised to 5%. This seems unlikely even for the United States itself. This is largely due to the fact that the United States wants to focus its forces on the Asian region. Trump wants Europe to be self-sufficient in terms of security and to be able to deal with potential threats on its own. European countries do have the potential to strengthen their defense capabilities. They also confirmed their willingness to invest more in the army, which allowed the issue to be resolved without a serious escalation. The second key issue in Trump's foreign policy has been the war in Ukraine and his approach to Russia. The recent dispute between Trump and Zelensky clearly demonstrated the split between the U.S. and Europe. European leaders have been largely supportive of Ukraine, while Trump has sought to minimize the U.S. role in the conflict and shift the bulk of the aid burden to the EU. European countries fear that without active U.S. support, security guarantees for Ukraine may be insufficient. That is why intensive consultations are underway, with Emmanuel Macron and other European leaders trying to convince Trump to at least support an EU peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. The issue of a resource deal has become a controversial and competitive topic. The United States wants to reap the benefits of the end of the war but does not want to take responsibility. Europe is not satisfied with this state of affairs, especially given that European countries, according to the Trump administration, will not even participate in negotiations with Russia and in final decisions. It also became known that the EU was also interested in the issue of resources. Discussions on this issue were held with the Ukrainian authorities. As a result, Europe finds itself outside the agreement in the process, and Trump generally ignores European interests and wants to get closer to Putin. He needs this to pull Russia away from China. Trump sees this as a chance to overcome his main enemy, and he sees Europe as being quite dependent on the United States. Rapprochement with Russia is also ambiguous for Europe. The problem is that the only real threat to Europe is Russia, while the United States, led by Trump, sees China as its threat. Each side is right in its own way, but this causes differences in global strategy. European countries, at least the vast majority of them, are interested in weakening Russia, which will guarantee their security. The United States, as mentioned above, sees its strategic objective as breaking off relations between China and Russia. In order to do so, Russia should be reintegrated into Western markets, with sanctions lifted at least partially. By the way, Europe also does not see China as its global enemy or rival, but rather as a stable trading partner, while the United States is engaged in trade wars with China. The third issue is the issue of duties. With Trump's second coming to the White House, the story of trade wars began to expand, and now Trump is going to impose duties not only against China, but also against Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. Trump repeatedly raised the issue of protecting the domestic market through protectionist policies on the campaign trail. However, many believe that the new tightening would only affect China, which already has duties against it. Trump promises to impose a 25% duty on all goods from the European Union. The latter promises to impose duties in response to American goods. They may be mirrored, also 25%, or they may be higher. Trump's economic policy does raise a lot of questions. and economists predict that such duties will hurt Americans rather than help them. But Trump sees this issue in his own way. The main goal is to restore industry in the United States, which can indeed happen through high tariffs. This will make U.S. goods more competitive on the domestic market and may revive some industries. But the most important thing that Trump will try to do in this way is to change the electoral picture of the United States. In the United States, there is a so-called Rust Belt, a number of depressed states known for their industrial past. But after the transition to a post-industrial economy, they began to stagnate. The symbol of this region is the city of Detroit, a once great city that is now in complete ruins. So, Trump may rely on these states to revive the industry. How will this affect the election? 3 states from this Rust Belt, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, have been swing states for years. This means that votes in these states are incredibly valuable, and the outcome of the election depends largely on these states. The revival of industry in these regions will lead to the fact that the states can finally choose a side and will mostly vote for Republicans. That is, they will cease to be swing states, which will ensure Republican victory, probably even for several election cycles in a row. Therefore, duties against the EU and other countries are used largely for domestic political purposes. The fourth problem is the ideological confrontation between Europe and the United States. It may seem surprising, but in fact there is a gap between Trump and the European establishment. Trump became president of the United States in 2016 on a wave of right-wing populism. Such sentiments are growing in Europe as well, but systemic forces remain in place in most of the most important countries. France and Germany are the main powers of the European Union, and their leaders are far from right-wing populists. This became even more evident recently when the Trump administration almost openly began supporting the AfD party in Germany. However, it did not win, so tensions remain. Vice President DeVent recently criticized Europe in general and called it not free enough. Relations with Britain are somewhat different, but a similar trend is observed there. The Trump administration has a generally negative attitude toward the European Union as a phenomenon, and even more negatively because of the dominance of the left liberals there, as Trump himself and his entourage believe. So we are already seeing ideological differences between the parties, and the fifth problem is Greenland. I have a separate video on this which explains why Trump is so interested in it. You can watch it. For now, I'll just outline the problem. Trump is actively claiming Greenland's land. In turn, the island is part of the Danish kingdom, albeit with broad autonomy. But European leaders have already defended the integrity of their European partners. Trump, of course, does not like this, and Greenland could indeed become a serious point of conflict in the future. Trump is quite seriously focused on the island. To summarize, since Trump came to power, relations between the United States and Europe have deteriorated. Trump is trying to change the foreign policy vector, which causes rejection in European countries. This concerns relations with Russia and Ukraine as well as security issues. More ideological differences have emerged, and some of Trump's domestic policies are affecting external actors. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos.
I never answer to no, man, I still go.